talk about everything with vitamin D and everything with diet and everything with immune response. Only very specific comments and topics in a certain type of immune response. Okay, so it's not by no means an exhaustive review. So that's my caveat. I am at Tulane University. I am in the School of Public Health, right? And that's how it looks if you're sitting on Canal Street staring at our building. And they timed it perfectly, the streetcars going by, you know, it's so friendly and welcoming. And New Orleans is a welcoming city. I invite you to come down one day and look me up, and we'll have lunch and discuss science. So, I had to cut some out of this presentation because I wanted to make sure I can get through most of it. So what I'm not going to talk about is sickle cell crisis and vitamin D. Unfortunately, I love that topic. But anyway, so I'll go over background of vitamin D and like I said, not an exhaustive background, but just enough to kind of get us through the presentation. The sources, the conversion inactive to active, the function of vitamin D as it pertains to pulmonary health, and the scope I'm talking and discussing it. Pulmonary peptides as a function of immune response, and cathelicidin in particular. A little primary data, some of which is in the process of being published, and I'll conclude and entertain questions. Okay. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. Can we advance like this? Cannot advance.
I think.
Yeah,
the arrows on
use the down arrow on the.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not working.
Oh, it's not working.
So that fat-soluble vitamin and that vitamin.
Just one moment. So we have to do a little troubleshooting here.
Thank you. So, it is a structure right here. Steroids, broken chains, broken steroid. It's vitamins in quotation marks because it's some discussion in the literature and in conferences about what's considered a vitamin and what's not, and the definition of what a vitamin is, and everyone has almost different definition of vitamin. So, we're not going on that road. It's a vitamin, quotation mark. Essential vitamins, a single steroid, it influences over 200 genes that we know of, and that list seems to be expanding. Helps regulate calcium utilization, we know about that. But recently, deficiencies have been identified with, vitamin D deficiencies have been identified with cancers like prostate, immune diseases such as MS, and inflammatory mediated diseases such as asthma and COPD, associated with, correlated with. Correlation does not necessarily mean causative, right? So, but we're still trying to figure out those connections. It's only found in a few foods, naturally. So oily fishes, like cod and salmon, eggs, a little bit small amount of eggs, small amount of mushrooms, and our fortified foods, milk and our juices, and our multivitamins, about 400 units a day, are multivitamins. But these concentrations here, in our fortified in our food, was established to try to stave off vitamin D deficient diseases associated with musculoskeletal health, such as rickets. So the concentrations are kind of low compared to what we probably need to be consuming or being exposed to, maintain healthy levels. But it's enough to make sure we can utilize calcium, and that's really why it's in our food at that level. But we can, most people can generate enough vitamin D to, most people in most areas of the world can generate enough vitamin D by sun exposure. That's why some folks consider it a hormone as opposed to a vitamin. So you can get all the vitamin D you need, most people in most areas of the world, with sun exposure. About 30 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week, direct sunlight, you can give her enough vitamin D to maintain healthy levels, theoretically.
So, if you're dressed the way you are right now, and you go outside for 30 minutes, will you have enough vitamin D, or do you have to be half naked?
Great question.
Go topless.
which is an option, which is an option. It's just not in Nebraska in the winter, right? I spent 4 years in Nebraska before I come to National Lane. So nevertheless, so there are articles of clothing that allow UVB to pass through and some that won't, right? So that depends on the clothing. But typically, if you're fully clothed and your average type of wear, no, it will block most UVB, or they'll diffuse it where you have a reduced amount of conversion. So, but in shorts and t-shirt, in most places in the world in the summer, typically you can convert enough vitamin D. And we're going to get to the caveats to that statement very soon, right? Well, later on in the conversation. So here's one of them. So if you're above the you're north of the 37th parallel, which runs from like San Francisco down to about St. Louis and up, and it's right about here, right? It's half a year. It's difficult to generate enough vitamin D just from direct sunlight. And also it has a lot to do with skin complexion, right, and melanin, but we'll get there. Okay? But just recognize in your mind, draw out in your mind that line, okay? And north of that, which a large percentage of America resides, major urban centers, Chicago, Detroit, New York, all above there, Seattle, all above that line, Minneapolis. Okay, sun, plentiful. But wait, isn't all sunlight dangerous, right? All sunlight is dangerous, so we're told. Everyone understands that. How essential is sunscreen protecting our skin, ourselves from skin cancer, and there's one size fits all as it pertains to sun protection factor, SPF, right? Are there benefits to sun exposure? Absolutely. So let's talk about solar electromagnetic radiation, so we're all on the same page. I know most of us in here are scientists or medical doctors. So please forgive me for going back and kind of going over this, but we all be on the same page, okay? So ultraviolet radiation, C, B, and A, ranges from about 100 nanometers to about 380 nanometers. You have your visible range, so we can see everything in our world. It's between 380 and 780. And then our infrared, things we can't see, at the end, 700 to about 1 millimeter. And of course, the X-rays and the radio on the other sides, right? We won't talk about those. So, UVB is the primary energy source that can convert vitamin D in our skin, the UVB. Ultraviolet radiation causes mood disorders. It assists our bodies in protecting and producing the active form of vitamin D, which connects to the mood disorders, and assists humans in producing antimicrobial peptides that fight infection, which is what I'm interested in. Okay. One of the topics I'm interested in. So, vitamin D deficiency. So most Americans fall within the healthy range. That range is a moving target. What scientists and medical doctors are trying to agree what a healthy range of vitamin D is, circulating levels of vitamin D. But typically, most of the literature puts the range somewhere between 25 nanograms per mil to about 50 or so nanograms per mil, typically. Somewhere in there, right? But there are a large percentage of Americans who chronically suffer from vitamin D deficiency, and that, once again, moving target, but around 20 nanograms per mil, less than that is considered insufficient in certain levels of vitamin D. What does that mean? That means that about 60% of African Americans are deficient. About 40% of Latinos are deficient. Most of the studies are saying. And in some Midwestern Native American tribes, over 80% of the youth are deficient in vitamin D. So what does that mean? Vitamin D deficiency is associated with asthma-related hospitalizations, cancer risk, upper respiratory tract infections, hospital-acquired infections and death. So low levels of vitamin D, chronic low levels of vitamin D are associated with these nosocomial infections in hospital, and mortality is also associated with low levels of vitamin D. And one study actually showed that 86% of African American children with asthma were severely deficient in vitamin D. So what does that mean? So let's talk more about vitamin D and how that happens. So we have this 7-dehydrocholesterol, which is we naturally produce in our skin. And when we're exposed to UVB, it converts to vitamin D3. You also can get vitamin D3 from the diet, limited sources, like I said, the fish and the milk and things of that nature. And then it's ubiquitously converted, and also can get this from our multivitamins. Okay. It's almost ubiquitously converted by the liver, or many enzymes, to its inactive form. Its inactive form is inactive and has to be converted to be effective by basically one enzyme. One enzyme converts inactive to active form, CYP27B1. So it's highly regulated steroid its active form is, and the production of its active form leads to its destruction. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So it's highly regulated. Institute of Medicine recommends about 600 units a day, international units a day. Researcher Dr. Vyeth in 1999 suggested we need closer to 4,000 a day to maintain healthy levels. That's combined, diet and exposure. Diet and sun exposure, you should have about 4,000 units a day. But it's highly tolerated. Up to 10,000 units a day are relatively normal for some professions. So looking at lifeguards, study for lifeguards, they have about 10,000 units a day because of all the sun exposure they're actually, that's part of their job. So it's highly tolerated, but toxic levels exceed 40,000 units a day, so it's highly tolerated. As you can see, it's really low compared to where the toxic ranges are. And NIH has admitted that vitamin D may have benefits for some of these health endpoints. Okay. Non-extra musculoskeletal endpoints, health endpoints. Okay. So the vitamin D receptor, what happens when you have this here, this form here, what happens to that form? It's an active form, what does it do? So it interacts with the vitamin D receptor. They're ligand activated transcription factors. They interact with the vitamin D response element in conjunction with the retinoic acid receptor. And it activates the vitamin D regulated genes. And these, based on the tissue, organelle, cell type, that result differs, right? I'm interested in the pulmonary system. Most tissues have vitamin D receptors. And like I said, calcitriol, 125 hydroxy vitamin D, binds with the vitamin D receptor, but also enhances CYP24A, which is the degrading enzyme. So once it's created, it upregulates the enzyme that degrades itself. So it's highly regulated, like I said. Downregulates the enzyme that converts, that creates it. So it's supposed to be there and it's supposed to go away, right? It's supposed to elicit a response and it's supposed to stop, like a switch. Okay? I'm interested in its ability to reduce the production of antimicrobial peptide, capsaicin, and LL37. That's what I'm particularly interested in. So, one of the projects I'm working on is ethanol-mediated vitamin D modulation. So there are a lot of folks out there who are not consuming alcohol, over-consuming alcohol, and suffer from severe vitamin D deficiency. But as one mode of severe being deficient in vitamin D, I'm investigating ethanol-mediated vitamin D reductions. So, ethanol consumption is pretty uniformly, it crosses social barriers, it crosses socioeconomic barriers, the boundaries. In America, about half the population admits to drinking 12 drinks a year, I'm sure it's more. There's a recall bias there, I'm sure, right? And with about 17 million people, 5% of the population, heavily consume alcohol, which is considered more than 12 drinks a week. And it's overconsumption associated with all the things we associate with overconsumption of alcohol. Vehicular crashes, and liver damage. So those are well established. But some of the less well-known associations to overconsumption of alcohol are reduced severe burn treatment success in the hospitals. So if you have an uncle, everyone has that uncle, overconsumes all the time, and then he's out there playing with the fireworks while he's drunk, and then he sets himself on fire, has to go into the hospital for a skin graft. He's going to reject this skin graft more readily than if you, non-alcoholic uncle, had the same issue, okay? So it has more frequent and severe respiratory infections. So there's a study that was mostly conducted. Can you guess what the study was? 28 or more drinks a week has statistically more upper respiratory tract infections and lower in this population. So 20 or more drinks a week were statistically associated with upper respiratory tract infections and lower. Can you guess who this population, who they studied for this? College students, absolutely. College students, binge drinking college students. So what happens is that vitamin D is well established. Ethanol has been well established to interfere with vitamins conversions to several vitamins. So we have A and B1 and B2, thiamine, nicotinamide. All these vitamins and essential minerals have been associated with being reduced by overconsumption of alcohol. Folic acid, vitamin C, E, B6, B12, all have they're being interfered with by alcohol overconsumption. So vitamin D is not alone in being affected by alcohol overconsumption, right? But when you normalize for we normalize for SES and diet, but still keep the consumption of alcohol the same, vitamin D deficiency still pans out. So it's something different than dietary modifications due to alcoholism that's associated with vitamin D deficiency, is what I'm saying. So this is the hypothetical, mostly proven, some hypothetical pathways. There's a lot going on here. I just want to draw attention to a couple things. The typical ethanol metabolic pathway is that you consume alcohol dehydrogenase, converts to acetaldehyde, dehydrogenase, changes it to an acetate, and in that process, some additives are created. 2E1 is an inducible phase 1 metabolizing enzyme. I'll talk more about that in a second. Alcohol induces 2E1. 2E1 metabolizes several xenobiotics that we are exposed to, and it's inducible. And it's typically when 2E1 shows up to the party, it's a problem, right? If we look at how the activity of 2E1 rarely is the end result positive, but it's necessary at times because we have xenobiotics like ethanol that will reside too long in the biological system if 2E1 wasn't induced. So it's necessary, but you don't really want your ethanol alcohol going through that pathway. Why? Because there are reactive species that are created from this metabolic pathway. And I published work on these reactive species that are created when you interact, when you overconsume alcohol, when mice overconsume alcohol, and in the pulmonary tissue, and how you can inhibit that dietarily. And that's a different conversation for a different day. So I brought this up because I think the actual causative agent that's interfering with vitamin D conversion isn't necessarily alcohol. It's one of the metabolites through the CYP1 pathway. And it's probably one of these radicals that we don't have identified yet, but we'll soon. And that's why I was basically giving you this pathway so you can kind of see downstream effect of alcohol exposure. So why am I talking about the pulmonary system and alcohol, right? And so someone has to be thinking that, right? Okay, well, when we overconsume alcohol, it travels, through our blood, crosses interacts with the capillary bed of our lungs, right? Crosses the capillary bed to the alveolar spaces in our lower lungs, enters the alveolar spaces. As we exhale, it moves to a larger airways, evaporates, condenses, cools, and coats the epithelial layers of our large airways. So that means that our lungs are, when we overconsume alcohol for a number of hours after our binge event, the lungs are bathed in this unchanged, unmetabolized alcohol. An organ that is not all that equipped to metabolize compounds such as this, okay? All right, so like I was alluding to, the pulmonary metabolic competence. So pulmonary tissue can activate and detoxify compounds. It can. But it's roughly, based on metabolizing enzymes at least, people are 50s, the level of activity in the pulmonary tissue is about a tenth or a third of the liver. So the liver is that wonderful organ that keeps crunching out, metabolizing things for us, eliminating things and making things more hydrophilic, hopefully, and sending it to the kidneys to excrete from our bodies. Our lungs have to do this with less manpower, woman power, right? And so specific is we have the olfactory mucosa is very adept at metabolizing compounds. The alveolars are not so much, and the respiratory epithelium is a mixed bag. Either depending on its particular compound, it may metabolize well based on metabolizing enzyme, and sometimes it doesn't. So, but this slide is to point out that the pulmonary system is capable of metabolizing compounds, just not the same level as the liver and other metabolizing organs. So, establish that. Cathelicidin or cathelicidin. It's a family of antimicrobial peptide precursors, has a highly identical N-terminal and a highly variable C-terminal. And that C-terminal N is cleaved off, and when it starts with a leucine and leucine, and 37 peptides, you have LL37. Okay? Now, LL37 is regulated by the vitamin D receptor. It's found in neutrophils, monocytes, area epithelium. You can quantify it in BAL fluid, bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, as you pull out someone's lungs. And active vitamin D increases this antimicrobial peptide in keratinocytes, and neutrophils, and bronchoepithelial cells, all published work. Right? So we know that active vitamin D will increase this antimicrobial peptide in various cell types. Some of these cell types are cells that are, the primary job is to fight infection, to attack foreign species in our body, and to eliminate them. All right, LL37 stimulates the generation of reactive oxygen species in macrophage cells, and which assists the macrophage cells in destroying the bacteria and engulfs, right? Okay. This is both mRNA expression and protein release of other microbial peptides, such as dispensins, and disrupts, and it does that by disrupting foreign cell membranes, it binds up polysaccharide residues, and recruits phagocytic cells like leukocytes. So not only does it assist macrophages in fighting their fight, but also is a chemokine that attracts other cell types to the site of injury or infection. And it has its own activity also. So it's an interesting peptide, and looking at it. So let's talk about CYP2E1 and my agent that I'm using to inhibit it. So it's an inducible phase 1 metabolizing enzyme, like I said earlier. Its induction by alcohol has been proven in literature to contribute to alcoholic liver injury. That pathway produces highly reactive oxygenated species. Alcohol hydroxyl radical, attacks lipids and proteins, non-aldehyde, attacks electron-rich macromolecules. The metabolites through CYP2E1 metabolism of ethanol is not a good process, but a necessary one. Disulfide, trisulfide, disulfide, di, and trisulfide, the organosulfur compounds. It's an oil-soluble organosulfur compound derived from garlic. And it's beneficially effective for human health for a lot of different endpoints. Breast cancer, it inhibits breast cancer in the animal model. It's been associated with attenuating colon cancer. Colon cancer in epidemiological studies, and also liver and esophageal. This also has protection against some chemical-induced toxicity, mostly by inhibiting 2E1. And for our interest, our endpoints, it inhibits 2E1 and increases antioxidant activity. So, big picture. All right. So we have diet, and UVB, the version of vitamin D is there. Is hops a ride on the vitamin D binding protein to liver. Liver converts it to calcidiol, traditional model. Liver converts it to calcidiol. The kidney will convert it to calcitriol, active vitamin D, and you have the whole calcium regulation pathway that everyone's familiar with. Okay. Also what happens is calcium can be converted in epithelial cells or immune cells or at tissue level, extrahepatically, extrahepatically, right, in different cells, different organs besides the liver and the kidney. And this conversion can happen in situ, at the site of injury or infection. And so then you get converted active vitamin D. Active vitamin D then interacts with the vitamin D receptor, hybridizes with the retinoic acid receptor, interacts with vitamin D response element, and then you have transcription, right? And we're interested in one of those things. One of the results of that is LL37 in the immune and bronchial epithelial cells, pulmonary epithelial cells. So, a little bit of data to share with you. Like I said, it's in the process of being published. So, ethanol-mediated pulmonary vitamin D is metabolism. So, took mice and we made them really drunk. We gave mice ad libitum. They had 20% alcohol in their water for 7 weeks. In their diet, they consume cholecalciferol. It's a upstream analog of vitamin D. It's inactive, has to be converted to be active. For 6 weeks, also consume the CYP2E1 inhibitory garlic component, disulfide, for 6 weeks. Then all these concentrations are non-toxic concentrations and concentrations that regularly are apparent in human diets. So this is about a clove and a half a day of garlic. Okay, so as you can see with this figure here, the control group and ethanol group are not statistically different. So this is inactive vitamin D levels in the serum. So expose them for 6 weeks for vitamin D, and disulfide, ethanol. And in the serum, you don't see a difference in active vitamin D. When you actually evaluate the lung tissue or analyze or quantify the amount of calcium in the lung tissue, it's a completely different picture. So you have this calcium 2 compartmental model that shows that the lungs have a different response to alcohol consumption chronically as compared to systemic levels or systemic response. Okay, once again, just a reminder of the pathways. You have D3, vitamin D3, ubiquitously converted by many enzymes to an active form that really has no activity, or very limited activity until converted by one enzyme to active vitamin D, and that carries all the work. This does all the work. Also induces the inactivating enzyme to produce the metabolites. These are not active. Okay. All right. So, active vitamin D. That was inactive. This is active vitamin D. Active vitamin D, lung tissue, and the BL fluid from the mice. Okay. And as you can see here, we have reductions. This is a busy slide, so we'll work through it. Reductions in active vitamin D when they consume alcohol is statistically significant. And this one here. This is the lung tissue. This is the BL fluid. Okay. When you expose them to the CYP2E1 inhibiting garlic, at that concentration, a couple cloves a day equivalent, you see a recovery of 60% in active vitamin D, and then also full recovery in the BL fluid observed by the BL fluid. This is the lung tissue, BL fluid. Also, I want to point out that when you give the mice vitamin D3 twice as much as normally in the mouse chow, which is something that we have to really consider if you're conducting animal studies and doing vitamin D research, is that the standard chow has a pretty high level of vitamin D, much higher than most people are actually consuming. So if you're doing vitamin D research, then you have to consider the fact that your mice are already consuming way more than most people are, and you may mask some of the endpoints because of that. So anyway, so we give them extra vitamin D twice as much as normal chow. You see active vitamin D in the BL increase, but at the same time, and alcohol exposure and consumption is still reduced. So alcohol, regardless of how much vitamin D you give, mouse or person, alcohol will always reduce the amount that's available for conversion to active vitamin D. Okay. All right, moving on. So don't run out of time. Okay, so this is the CYP27B1. Let's point out that the converting enzyme is reduced in alcohol, the protein levels in the alcohol group, and is recovered by about 30%. In the garlic sulfide group, CYP21, the enzyme that's induced by alcohol, is actually really increased in the lung tissue, and also attenuated by sulfide. So it's kind of like proof of concept type of slide. Okay. This is the cells. These are human bronchoepithelial cells, primaries. These are Bs2Bs. These are immortalized bronchial cells. And the whole conversation about why those are on there later, I guess, we can talk about them afterwards. But immortalized is sometimes different from primary cells. Hopefully not. And this is the BDL fluid for the mice, looking at quantifying this peptide, antimicrobial peptide LL37, in the epithelial cells, primary, immortalized in the mice. Okay, so reduction in ethanol at 6 hours exposure, ethanol at 80 millimolar, sulfide at 10 micromolar, and we also treat the cells with active vitamin D and see if we can kind of bypass the pathway. So if you have alcohol interfering with CYP27B1, you can just go beyond that block and give them active vitamin D and see if you can kind of just recover the effect and get recovered active your LL37 going downstream block past the blockage. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the same reduction in ethanol in the cell model. There's an apparent reduction, not statistical, but it's there in the Bs2Bs, the immortalized cell, in the primary cell, we see a reduction. And we also see that active vitamin D also seems to recover that. This right here is the whole concept why this is the big issue in the vitamin D mouse research world. Mice are nocturnal, and evolution has given them a free pass on this, so that their actual LL37 antimicrobial pathways are vitamin D response element independent, because they're nocturnal, right? They will never get the amount of vitamin D they need to maintain a healthy immune system. So the mouse model is not the best model to evaluate this endpoint at the very, very end, past vitamin D response element. And we're working on humanizing the mouse model to make it possible, but we're trying to work around this blockage, right? So, ethanol chronic consumption reduces active vitamin D in vivo and vitro. To summarize, reduces the antimicrobial peptide LL37 in vitro. Reduction is at least partially mediated by 27B1, which is not novel. We're not the first ones to establish this. It's been established before. Sulfide restores active vitamin D to control levels of ethanol-fed mice and human bronchoepithelial cells. So, what does that mean? So you go from bench to a trench, right? So what does it mean for regular people in the real world, right? So we wanted to try to offset the lack of ability to kind of quantify this antimicrobial peptide in the mouse model. We partnered with the Colorado Pulmonary Alcohol Research Consortium, COPARC. They're charged with collecting samples from alcohol use-dependent patients and their match controls, storing them in a bio repository, and making them available for researchers for investigative endpoints. So, like I said, biobank of BAL fluid, bronchial brushings, whole blood, and cell breath condensate, etc. What we're really interested in is also demographic descriptors, because we believe there's a racial and geographic component to this too, which you can't investigate in mice. So, like I said, it gives a unique opportunity to look at these endpoints, 125 hepcidin, demographic, and respiratory health survey results. And we're going to hopefully use it for that. All right, what's the interests were in active vitamin D, the ratio between the two, that matters, and in the BDL fluid and the serum, active antimicrobial peptide levels in the BDL, and the geographic information mediated via vitamin D species and L37 levels. We think it's association with that. And respiratory infection rates is difficult to get sometimes in this population, but we're working toward it. So, a lot of error bars. We have an N of 20. And if anyone who works with human populations, you know there's so much diversity in the population that you have to have a very high N to deal with some of these error bars. You know, you have to power your study appropriately to guard against some of these results. But you have the samples. You only use the samples that you can get. Okay, N of 20. So to end at the vitamin D levels in the BDL, alcohol use patients could impair match controls. As you can see, there is a trend downward in the inactive vitamin D, but it's a statistically significant difference in the BDL fluid from in the active vitamin D in the normal impair match control compared to the alcohol use dependent patients in the BDL fluid. When you quantify LL37 levels, there's also a trend downward, but this error bar is causing me to lose hair, and we're working on getting samples from cohort to try to eliminate this. The issue is this. One of the issues, one of the limitations of this study is this. To get back to it quick enough, I'll point it to is that right now. What's going on in Colorado right now? A whole lot of, yes. So I don't want that confounder in my study. I'm trying to get only alcohol consuming people and their match controls. Cigarette smoke or other types of smoke can confound your study. And we've already observed this in the animal model, actually. We had co-exposed alcohol and cigarette smoke mice, and cigarette smoke confounds endpoints. So that's why our N is so low. There's very few people out there, folks who drink a lot of alcohol and don't smoke. Very few people actually drink alcohol and don't smoke anything. So it's very difficult to find. So anyway, analyze more samples, confirm observations from different collection sites. We're going to collecting getting sites from Georgia.
Go to the airlines.
Right.
So Alaska Airlines doesn't allow any smoking. So there's a lot of people who drink heavily on their layovers but don't smoke. So I'm just saying, you can go there.
Yeah, and actually there's a great suggestion because there's an association for stewardesses and stewards that funds some pulmonary research. Thank you. So see how it works, you know, different backgrounds come together, it's synergy, right? Okay, so analyze, compare health and respiratory infection surveys, and like I said, racial, geographic, behavioral, dietary. If you can get this, it'd be great. Move on. So what? Why are sufficient levels of vitamin D so essential? Like I said, 3% of the mouse of the human genome is directly or indirectly related to active vitamin D. 3%, right? If that was equivalent, all of the genes will only have 33 genes, right? So that's a large amount of the genome is regulated through active vitamin D. Cell proliferation, differentiation, apoptosis, all are associated with it. Cell level, active vitamin D modulates innate and adaptive immune system, and that's a whole field of study. Stimulates the immune response upon infection, and deficiencies, like I said, are associated. Deficiencies of vitamin D are associated with asthma exacerbations, COPD, severity, and cancer. So that's why it's so important. So we stepped into the rock and the hard place, right? Stepped into the rock and skin cancer. You know, how to find a balance between healthy sun exposure, diet, vitamin D supplementation, and sufficient vitamin D levels, right? Because we're like, well, I need sun, but I don't want skin cancer, right? All right, first know your skin type. My opinion, this is my opinion. This is Dr. Michael McCaskill's opinion, okay? I have medical doctor friends who we discuss these things over a nice glass of wine. So anyway, the Centers for Disease Control Prevention references the Fitzpatrick Skin Tone Scale, and with designated levels from 1 to 6, right? And we're discussing skin cancer prevention. So you click on the website, go there, Google it, you can kind of see where you fall on the skin tone scale, right? It's not determined by race, right? But type of melanin, okay? So we have to kind of keep that. So race is a social construct, right? And this is a biological concept. We have to divorce ourselves from that, right? Or try to at least. So it's type of melanin found in every person on the planet. So phospho-melanin is lighter and predominates skin types of 1 and 2, right? Eumelanin is darker and predominates skin types of 5 and 6. So in the middle, you have mixtures and variations, and ratios between the two, right? To determine your skin type. Why is it important? Well, melanin has been coined as being the most perfect protection against UVB or UVR photo damage. Melanin is very effective at blocking UVR. Okay? It takes, one researcher determines that UVB takes that, the melanin takes the UVB or UVR and converts it to heat. That's how it protects the lower levels, basically the basal level of the skin. So it's very effective at doing so. It's 36 times more protective than phospho-melanin. Okay? So if you're type 5 and 6, you're 70 times less likely to develop skin cancer by some estimates. 70 times less likely to develop skin cancer as compared to the 1 and 2. Right? In North America, you can block about 75% of UVR if you are a 5 and 6. Okay? The above the 37th latitude, once again, you may be insufficient. You may not be able to convert enough vitamin D to maintain healthy levels if you're above 37th parallel. And you're 5 and 6. Type 1 and 2. You have nearly zero protection from UVR. Okay? And you should wear SPF 30 or higher for several months before any outdoor activities. But you need very little sun exposure to convert your vitamin D. So biology gives and it takes, right? So so you can't determine where you fall on the risk of either having skin cancer or being vitamin D deficient if you don't acknowledge your skin type, your skin type, right? Okay. So if you're 1 or 2, understand you must protect your skin from harmful sunlight at all times, right? If you're 5 or 6, your risk of skin cancer is very low. You're blocking 75% to maybe 90% of UVR, right? But due to geographic, dietary, and cultural factors, 5 and 6 skin types are 5 or 6 in North America are serious risk of vitamin D deficiency associated disorders. So when I was staying in Nebraska, Omaha, which is above that 37th parallel, and citizens in Nebraska were very welcoming to refugees in East Africa. So you have folks from Southern Sudan relocating to Omaha, Nebraska, and then they hear in the news, go outside, put a skin block on your children. Your children are going to get skin cancer, you're going to get skin cancer. So you see someone from Southern Sudan putting on sunblock at the park and their kids. And I was like, you kind of already blocked by 90% because of what you're born with. Now you're just blocking what could be beneficial, right? And that's where the message needs to be kind of tailored toward specifically to certain people, right? And that's what we got to work toward in America. So everyone, regardless of your skin type, should have their vitamin D levels evaluated by their primary care physician. Know where you are, right? So you know how to change your health. Like I said, you want to be in their healthy range between 25 and 50 is the healthy range. Use appropriate sunscreen, like I said, most likely not at all. Morning or evening sunlight is healthiest, right? Stay out of the sun, regardless of your skin type. Midday is not healthy. And talk with your physician about vitamin D status and phenotypes, specific skin cancer risk, and make my acknowledgments. My colleagues at Tulane. I did not get to my sickle cell research, but that's my colleague who's working with me on that. Now she's in Seattle. My technicians and my University of Nebraska colleagues, a lot of this work was started. And my collaborator in Colorado. And any questions?
See, for vitamin D, the other important fact, at least people have shown that vitamin D receptor expression is an important factor. Deficiency of that they found has led to cardiovascular diseases. The vitamin D plays a major role in cardiovascular disease, also proven. So how do you now you correlate your experiments with vitamin D receptor expression? Because in some of the tissues, if there is no vitamin D receptor expression, then you don't see the effect of vitamin D at all, right?
Mm-hmm. There have been vitamin D receptor knockout models in mice that have ended very badly. I think it's a terminal deletion, I think, vitamin D knockouts. So, but that has been the polymorphic genetic differences in people have led to vitamin D deficiency. But most of the vitamin D deficiency we're seeing in the population, particularly African American, Latino population, is not associated with vitamin D receptor differences. It's just exposure, mostly. Right.
You gave the mice a garlic clove and a half.
We did. Chopped it. I minced it up for them and everything. Made like a little dish for them. Yeah, they loved it. Actually, what we did is I contacted the feed provider and I gave them concentration dollar so far I wanted them to feed, and they produced it for them. They came in and they liked it. Surprisingly, the mice actually really liked it. I was really concerned about the mice rejecting the feed,
Right.
Because you could smell the garlic coming off the feed, and they didn't. They were fine with it, you know. But then they also are liquored up too, so
Yeah.
yes.
What blood levels
Glass of wine
of
at the Italian
ethanol
restaurant.
are
There you go.
in the studies?
So we're getting black alcohol levels that are we get about 80 millimolar, you know, so we're getting between the ranges of 60 and 100 is what we've seen in our mouse model. So I chose 80 millimolar for our cell study because we've seen that range. Some mice will tolerate a little less.
So
than
how do you
others.
get them to drink it?
You have to condition them to drink it. So we have a ramping week.
Uh-huh.
And start with rats will not drink alcohol. Rats will reject it wholly. And then you got to do it, leave it a liquid diet to get them to drink the alcohol. But mice are averse to it, so you have to condition them for it. So ramping week with going from 0 to 20, and mix a little saccharin with it, give them a little saccharin with it, and they'll over time will prefer it over water actually.
Wow.
So it takes about a week to condition it to 20%.
So like Long Island iced tea to vodka, right?
Right, exactly. Going from very, very light glass of wine to straight just.
Yeah.
And they'll drink like they behave like we behave. They behave like our bench models or in human populations. They will consume until they pass out. And we'll feed up in the air, you know, and they'll pass out, they'll wake up and drink more. So yeah.
So are there different strains of mouse that have different levels of alcohol preference under those models?
That's a great question. We use our Secret 7 Flat 6 because it's a great background and it's a very popular mouse model to use because we compare results with half the world who do mouse studies. But I don't know if there are any strains that actually prefer alcohol more than others. I'm not sure.
So it would be interesting, you know, because the coat of the C57 blacks is black and the Swiss Webster's is white, whether, you know, if they drink, even though that's not an inbred one, I think there are some strains of pure mice that are light coated, and then you wonder if that would make a difference in terms of the light-induced vitamin D component.
That's an interesting concept. I think, but the problem is that it's an interesting concept. When we shade the mice, they all look the same. So their skin, the melanin in their skin is about the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So melanin's a fascinating. If everyone lived and never left where they evolved, this would be a problem, right? Because immigration, America's a very diverse place than some of our European colleagues. And this is an issue that we have to address. We have to address this in America. So.
Okay. I have another question. See, you gave the vitamin level between 30 nanogram per ml to 80 nanogram per ml to be optimal, right? In the blood. Yeah.
Oh no, we gave the
No, the blood level in humans.
Yes.
You mentioned it's between 30 nanogram per ml to 80. And well, that's what happened when I moved from Los Angeles to Missouri. My Missouri being cold, the vitamin level came down, and I had joint pains and lethargic. Then somehow diagnosed and then taking supplement. Now my question is, so if it is below 30 nanogram, then you get all the deficiencies symptoms. But if you take a supplement, and if it exceeds beyond 80 nanogram per ml, have you come across any case of vitamin D excess causing toxicity? Is known, is reported?
The first thing you see is hypercalcemia. It's the first thing you'll notice, hypercalcemia. Then if you were not advised to stop taking high levels of vitamin D, you'll start seeing hair loss and neurological issues and eventual death. But the first thing you'll see is hypercalcemia, and you probably won't see that until above 100 nanograms per mil. There have been associations. I was at a conference in DC, not from here, a vitamin D conference, and issue is medical doctors are not sure what the cutoff line is, what they are recommending vitamin D supplementation. And the concern is that they're not, where's the cutoff? Most of the data says, but under 20 nanograms per mil, you should supplement. Most of the data, between 20 and 30, you can say, but under 20 nanograms, and especially over 10, under 10. So you should start intensive supplementation of vitamin D.
I think we need to
Gotta go.
kind of
Yes.
go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you all. Thank you.
Very nice.